All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty tangled web, a financial and legal battle. It's all happening over in Nigeria. And we've got a whole bunch of stuff to sort through, court documents, news reports, even some personal letters. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and you know what's really fascinating about this whole thing?
Yeah.
It goes way beyond just, money. It really gets into how power and influence work, especially in Nigeria when you look at their financial world and the media there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So at the center of all this is Nduka Obaigbena, the big media guy, the one behind THISDAY newspaper and Arise TV. And then you have Femi Otedola. Now, he's a billionaire businessman, and he's the chair of First Bank of Nigeria. So here's the thing. First Bank, they're saying that Obaigbena's company, General Hydrocarbons Limited, this oil servicing company, owes them a whole lot of money, like a crazy amount, something like $718 million. And to make things even spicier, a court in Lagos, they've put a freeze on Obaigbena's assets up to $225 million.
Yeah, that freeze is a big deal. It's officially called a Mareva injunction. It's a legal thing they use to stop people from, hiding assets. Basically, First Bank, they went to the court and said, hey, we think this guy might try to move his money around so he doesn't have to pay up. And the court agreed. So, bam, assets frozen.
Wow. Okay, so this is serious stuff. But Obaigbena, he's not just taking this lying down, he's coming back with his own story. He's saying this whole debt thing, it's not that simple. In fact, he claims he actually saved First Bank from completely going under back in 2021. He's saying he used his own resources from this oil block he's got, it's called OML 120, to help First Bank make more money and prevent a huge financial disaster.
Right, and this is where things get really interesting. To understand what Obaigbena is saying, we got to go back and look at what was going on with First Bank. They'd given this massive loan to Atlantic Energy, another oil company. Well, Atlantic Energy ended up facing, fraud charges the whole 9 yards. And that left First Bank with a gigantic financial mess on their hands.
So where does Obaigbena's oil block, this OML 120, come into all of this? How does that fit in?
Well, according to Obaigbena, he made this deal with First Bank. They were going to finance the development of his oil block, OML 120. The idea was they would share the profits, right?
Yeah.
And First Bank, they could use their share to make up for the losses they took from that Atlantic Energy loan. Kind of like a strategic partnership. Everyone wins, in theory at least.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, kind of. But if it was such a good deal for both of them, why are we seeing this whole legal battle now? It sounds like they both should have benefited from this.
Well, yeah, that's where the whole deal gone wrong thing comes in. Obaigbenas, he's saying First Bank didn't hold up their end of the deal. He says they didn't give him enough money to really develop OML 120 the way they promised. And because of that, the oil block couldn't produce as much oil, didn't make as much money. And First Bank, well, they didn't get those profits they were counting on to make up for their losses.
Ugh. So it's like Obaigbenas is saying he's the one who got screwed over. First Bank didn't do what they said they would, and now they're trying to blame him for it and make him pay for their bad loan. So it's kind of a he said, she said situation, right? First Bank says he owes them money. Obaigbenas says, no, 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 they messed up the deal.
Right. It's important to keep in mind, though, right now these are just accusations. The truth, well, it's probably buried somewhere in all the details. But you got to think, both sides, they have reasons to make themselves look good in this whole thing.
Yeah.
First Bank, they're a huge financial player. They want to protect their reputation, and they obviously want to get their money back. And then you have Obaigbena. He's a big name in media. He's trying to protect his businesses and, his own image.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got these two very different stories, but you mentioned something before about conflicting court orders. This whole legal thing, it's even weirder. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Remember that freeze on Obaigbena's assets? Well, there's this other court order, and it was issued by a different judge in the same month. And this order seems to say that First Bank can't do anything against Obaigbena or his family because the whole thing is supposed to be handled through arbitration.
Hold on, wait a minute. So you're telling me there are two court orders out there, both from the same month, and they're saying totally opposite things. How is that even possible?
Yeah, it shows you how complicated the legal system can be, right?
Ah.
The law can be interpreted in different ways. Plus, court cases, they can drag on forever with appeals and different stages and all that. It's a long, messy process.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so we've just started digging into this, and it's already a lot to wrap our heads around. It seems like this whole thing could have a big impact on how things work financially in Nigeria. What are some of the big things we should be watching out for? What are the potential consequences of this?
Well, one thing's for sure. First Bank's reputation. It's definitely on the line here. If Obaigbena's claims, that they broke their promises, If that gains any traction, people might start losing trust in the bank. And for any bank, trust is everything. If people lose faith, well, it could affect everything. People might not want to keep their money there anymore. Investors might back out, and that can make the whole bank shaky.
And let's not forget about Obaigbena's media empire. If he ends up owing all this money and things go south for him financially, what happens to his newspapers and TV stations? They're a big part of what people in Nigeria see and hear, right?
Absolutely. They play a huge role in shaping public opinion. If those outlets struggle or, even shut down, it could really limit what information people have access to, the different points of view they get exposed to.
Right. So it's not just about the money, it's about freedom of the press, people's right to information. This whole financial battle, it's tied to so many other things, social stuff, political stuff, you name it.
Exactly. It's a really good example of how everything is connected. What seems like a financial dispute between two guys, well, it can have ripple effects across a whole country. And it raises all these big questions about how businesses should be run, about financial rules and regulations, about the relationship between media and money, the whole thing.
All right, so we've laid out the basics here. We've got this back and forth about the money, about who's to blame, and then these legal twists and turns with the court orders. But we haven't really gotten into the nitty-gritty of Obaigbena's claims about saving First Bank. And of course, there's that whole thing with Atlantic Energy and how they fit into all of this. Okay, so let's get back into it. We're talking about Obaigbena's claims, the whole saving First Bank thing. And that oil block of his, OML 120, it's time to really unpack what happened with Atlantic Energy and how this whole situation blew up.
Yeah, so to really understand what Obaigbena is saying, we got to go back to 2021. That's when First Bank was dealing with the fallout from that Atlantic Energy loan, the one that went bad. Remember, that loan was supposed to finance oil stuff, but then Atlantic Energy got hit with those fraud charges. And First Bank, they were stuck with a huge loss, a real financial headache.
Yeah. So how did Obaigbena get involved in all of this? Was he already working with Atlantic Energy before that?
Well, Obaigbenas says he wasn't directly involved with Atlantic Energy. He claims he got involved because First Bank was trying to, dig themselves out of that hole from the bad loan.
Right.
And they saw his oil block, this OML 120, as a way to maybe, make up for some of those losses. Remember, OML 120, that's a big oil block. It's offshore, and it has the potential to produce a lot of oil, so it's a valuable asset.
Okay, I get it. So First Bank was thinking, hey, maybe we can use this oil block to get some of our money back from that Atlantic Energy mess. So what exactly was this deal between them? What did they agree to?
Well, Obaigbenas says that First Bank wanted to team up. They would give him the money to develop OML 120, get it producing oil, and then they would split the profits. First Bank would use their share to, cover the losses from the Atlantic Energy loan. And Obaigbena, well, he'd get his oil block developed and start making money from it.
Sounds pretty good on paper, right? Everyone wins.
Yeah, at least in theory. But obviously something went wrong because now we have this whole legal fight going on. So where did things go south?
Obaigbena's main argument is that First Bank, well, they didn't keep their word. He says they didn't give him enough money to really develop OML 120 like they promised. And because of that, he couldn't produce as much oil as they planned. And the profits, well, they just weren't there.
So instead of both of them making money and First Bank getting their losses back, Obaigbenas is being accused of owing them even more money, and First Bank's taking him to court to try and get it. Sounds like a classic deal gone bad story. They both had this agreement, but now they can't agree on who's responsible for things falling apart. Right, and this is where the whole legal battle gets really messy. Obaigbena isn't just accepting what First Bank is saying. He's fighting back, using the courts to challenge them. Remember that other court order we talked about? The one that seems to say First Bank can't go after Obaigbena? Well, that just makes this whole thing even more complicated.
Right, and we have to consider, why is each side doing what they're doing? First Bank, they're under a lot of pressure to recover from that Atlantic Energy loan. I mean, they lost a ton of money, so maybe that's pushing them to be really aggressive with Obaigbena to try and get any money they can back.
And on the flip side, Obaigbena, he's trying to protect himself, his businesses, his reputation. He's saying, hey, I was just trying to help you guys and you screwed me over. It's a tough situation for sure.
Yeah, it feels like we're in this gray area where both sides have a point. They both feel wronged.
Yeah.
How do you figure out the truth in all of this? It's like, who do you believe?
That's the hard part with these kinds of cases. To really figure out what happened, you have to dig into the details. You need to look at financial records, contracts, listen to what everyone involved has to say. And even then, you have to remember that everyone has a bias. First Bank and Obaigbenas, They both want to look good in all of this, so you have to be careful and look at everything with a critical eye.
Right. It might be impossible to say with 100% certainty who's right and who's wrong. But by looking at all the information, considering all the angles, we can at least get a better understanding of what happened. This isn't just a story about a debt, though, right? It's about how things work in Nigeria, in their financial world, in the media.
That's a great point. This case, it's like a window into how businesses operate in Nigeria, how financial rules and regulations work, the whole power structure, really. It shows us that these things are never simple. You have to look at the connections, the motivations, the legal maneuvers, the whole picture.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see that now. It's bigger than just who owes who money.
Yeah.
And this could have a ripple effect on the whole financial system in Nigeria, on the media, on people's trust in those institutions. Okay, so we're wrapping up our deep dive into this crazy situation. We've heard both sides of the story. We've looked at the legal stuff, all that. But now I'm thinking about, like, what does this actually mean for people in Nigeria? How could this whole thing with Obaigbenas and First Bank, all this money and legal stuff, how could that affect regular people?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? It's easy to get caught up in the drama of it all, these big names, these huge amounts of money. But we have to remember, this could have real consequences for the everyday person in Nigeria. We talked about the impact on First Bank and Obaigbena's media companies, but it could be even bigger than that. It could affect the whole financial system and how people view those institutions.
So, like, how would that actually play out? How could this case affect someone who's just trying to live their life, not a billionaire or a media mogul?
We'll take First Bank, for example.
Hmm.
It's one of the biggest banks in Nigeria. It's been around forever. Tons of people use it. But if this whole thing with Obaigbena makes them look bad, if people start thinking they're shady or that they can't be trusted, well, that could hurt the whole banking system.
Yeah, I guess
Right.
people would get nervous, right? Like, is my money safe in this bank? Should I be worried about the whole banking system now?
Exactly. Trust is everything for banks. If people lose that trust, they might start pulling their money out. They might not want to borrow money from banks anymore. And that can have a domino effect, making it harder for businesses to get loans, for the economy to grow. That means fewer jobs, maybe higher interest rates. It can really impact people's wallets.
Wow, yeah, I see what you mean. And then there's Obaigbena's media empire, right? If his companies take a hit because of this, how would that affect what news and information people in Nigeria have access to?
Right. Obaigbena's newspapers and TV stations, they're a big part of the media landscape in Nigeria. They help shape public opinion. They report on what's happening. If those outlets are struggling, or, worst case scenario, if they have to shut down, well, that means fewer voices, fewer perspectives.
So it's not just about money then, it's about freedom of the press, people's right to know what's going on. This whole financial battle, it's tied to so much more than just dollars and cents.
It really is. It shows how connected everything is. Finance, media, politics, they all influence each other. What starts as a fight between two powerful people can end up affecting a whole country, even a whole society.
This has been, like, eye-opening, for sure. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the biggest takeaway for our listener? What should they keep in mind as this whole thing unfolds?
I think the biggest lesson here is about transparency, especially when it comes to powerful institutions like banks and media companies. They have a huge impact on our lives, so they need to be open and accountable for their actions. This whole case, no matter how it ends, it reminds us that we need to keep a close eye on these institutions, ask questions, and demand transparency.
I agree. And for our listeners out there, stay curious, keep learning, keep digging deeper. That's what these deep dives are all about. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.